It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, Quiller Nation, to this very exciting episode of Don't Quill the Messenger with our very special guest who we have been trying to line up and bring to you for some time now. It is long overdue. She is Dr. Roz Barber. She is the author of Shakespeare, The Evidence, The Marlowe Papers, and other works. She's also the editor of a fun little book called Know-It-Alls Shakespeare, also known as 30-Second Shakespeare, which, by the way, is perfect for young readers and readers who are new to details about the Shakespeare canon. Ross, welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger.
Hi, it's great to finally be here.
It is, and a lot of people, I'm not sure if they're aware of this, but you're also the director of research at the Shakespearean Authorship Trust. And you have an online course called Introduction to Who Wrote Shakespeare that has seen more than 16,000 registered students. And I'd like to talk a little bit about not only your books, but also some of the work you're doing for the Shakespearean Authorship Trust and your course, which I have yet to sign up for and take, but that I know many of our listeners have and are a part of that 16,000 people. But I'd also like you to share with the listeners what that's all about and how they can take the course if they want to.
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk about it.
Well, why don't we begin with that?
Shall we start? Yeah, let's start with that. So 16,000 people is quite amazing. I love it. I get a little email from them every week saying how many new people have registered and how many people have completed. Now, not everybody who registers completes. I don't know how that is, when it's a self-directed course, but we have had a lot of people come through it, and quite often people turn up on my other social media or on my Substack and say, "Hey, I did your course," and that's how they've kind of found out about me. Really, they bumped into the course first, and then they ended up sort of coming to one of my, joining some social media thing or subscribing to my authorship question Substack or whatever. So, but it's really. For me, it was an incredibly exciting opportunity to spread the word of the authorship question to a mainstream audience, because Coursera, who host it, they do these, they're called MOOCs, Massive Open Online Courses. And they, it's quite hard, obviously, to get the authorship question through anything academic, but they generally they work with universities and they host courses that are run by academics. And I was at Goldsmiths, University of London at the time. I've only just recently I've lost that job in July, but I was there for 10 years. And in 2017, they said, we want any academics from this department. If you've got any ideas for an open online course, like a free course, put it forward. There was a kind of competitive tender process, but they were going to then fund it. They were going to fund the professional filming of it, the licensing of the images, the editing, sort of putting it into shape. And I had to do, it was quite a lot of work, but I had to write the scripts. It had to be no more than 10-minute segments, but then an overall structure and everything else. So I put forward my proposal and it got agreed, which was amazing. And then we spent 6 months. I wrote it and then we had to film it. And then it was edited, and then I had to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. And we had to put up they added automatic subtitles that were terrible, and I had to go through all of those and try and correct them. But it's been incredible. It's been really brilliant for getting people on board with the authorship question. And because it has the University of London stamp of authority on it, the logo on it, I feel like that's made a big difference. it's certainly caused a big furore with the people who don't like the authorship question. I had people write to my head of department saying that I was bringing Goldsmiths into disrepute. And, Stanley Wells was actually one of those people who wrote to the university and said, that it was an appalling thing that I'd done. I got a lot of flack for it from Oxfordians, but I got a lot of support within my department, and it was passed through a kind of an academic quality control process. And they said it was one of the best online courses that they'd seen. They were really pleased with it and excited about it. So for me, it was a huge success. It was only after it was launched and I had so many of the usual crew from the Oxford group come in and just be really unpleasant. I mean, I don't mind kind of disagreement. I don't mind people giving the other point of view. I think that's really important. But there was quite a lot of misogyny. They were sort of very sneery and contemptuous in their approach to anyone who doubts. They just think, we're all lunatics as far as they're concerned. So they're really contemptuous. And
we've had a lot of guests.
It just made it really impossible.
We've had a lot of guests here on the program who have said the same thing and who have suffered the same types of attacks. And, it's very obvious that whenever, the attacks increase in association with how threatened they feel by whatever the work is or the person who has put forward the work. And with your experience in the variety of realms that you have under your belt, I mean, you are definitely, sort of this polymath of people who, a lot of people don't know you come from a biology background before literature, that you have experience as a lecturer, that you have experience as a researcher, you have experience in comedy on the stage. People aren't aware of that, I'm sure. And when you tie all of that together into a course like this, it becomes engaging, it becomes interesting, and it threatens them. And they must have lost their minds. And when that happens, they pull out every missile they can possibly find in their arsenal and just start shooting at random, don't they?
They certainly do. And of course, they immediately flooded it with 1-star reviews, but it hasn't made any difference because the overall, despite their 1-star reviews, they are actually few in number. And despite their 1-star reviews, it's got a 4.6.5 rating overall. It's doing really well. It's still pulling people in, which I'm sure really galls them. And it's, and people, fairly experienced people in the authorship question have done it and got something out of it. And people brand new to the question have come into it, and it's sort of their first contact for some people with it. I actually met someone when I went to the SOF conference in New Orleans in November to deliver a talk. I met someone there. He came up to me and said, during lockdown, he saw his brother was on the computer, he was doing something, and he said, "What are you doing?" And his brother was doing my course, and that's how he didn't know anything about the authorship question. And then next thing you know, he's doing the course, and now he's so into it that he was at the SOF conference. And I actually noticed, because I've been involved in the question very actively for about 15 years, and sort of looking into it for a bit earlier than that, almost 20 years since I began my PhD proposal. But I've noticed how much the profile of people is getting younger, which is really exciting. And I know that part of that is through the internet, through the way that it spreads across the internet. And definitely the course has had, older and younger people. And this guy who came up to me, he's in his 30s and totally enthusiastic, had got his wife into it. She was there, and I love that. I love that it's spreading the word, like so many other things now. Jodie Picoult doing a great job of spreading the word and causing trouble,
As a matter of
stirring
fact,
up
I
the
just
objectors.
received an email about her and her new book, and from one of my regular loyal listeners. And so I'm going to be contacting her to see if I can get her on as a guest, because I am a staunch believer that type of approach is really going to change things.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that was actually what I was doing, a very small scale, because literary stuff, but whereas Jodi Picoult's very obviously already a sort of blockbuster author, best-selling author, extremely well-known. She's got a huge platform, so much more powerful. But doing it through fiction is great, which is why I wrote the Marlowe Papers, really. I had the idea for the Marlowe Papers before I started thinking that there was an actual basis for doubt. But as I started researching it, I thought, wow, there really is good reason to doubt the orthodox story. And after that, I thought, well, a novel is a really nice way of kind of softening people up to the possibility. I mean, they don't have to buy it. They don't have to feel threatened by a work of fiction. You can say, well, it is just a novel, and you can just read it as a novel. But with Jodi Picoult, of course, she's so well established. I mean, the Marlowe Papers was my debut, and it's literary fiction, really. So small audience, but she's got huge fans. She's been doing very well for more than a decade. So it's a very significant development, I think, in the authorship question, Jodi Picoult coming in with her book. And it's #1 bestseller in the New York Times chart straight away, that's huge impact for this theory. And although it's based, obviously is promoting Amelia Lania Bassano to some degree. When you see her interview with her, she's definitely positioned more on a kind of group thing. She's saying Shakespeare, in her view, rented his name even to people who were afraid to publish under their own or write plays under their own. So, and she's obviously absorbed some very good research, which she's managing to dissipate in mainstream channels, media channels. I saw in the Daily Mail, which is a big tabloid over here in the UK, this week, it reported in depth on a program she'd been on BBC Radio 4, I think. And it gave both sides. It was extremely fair. It allowed the Birthplace Trust to come in with their view, but it didn't slam Jodi Picoult. And it gave a platform for things like she was talking about Othello's links to Bassano del Greco, which is, I would say, this has always been a really interesting piece of research since, I'm trying to think when it was published, late 90s, but in a tiny little obscure journal that hardly anyone read. And then authorship doubters picked it up. Probably, I think the first I saw of it was during my PhD, so 2000s and, before 2010. But it's been this really esoteric piece of knowledge that, it's hard to put across to people why this is significant. And she's managed to get that in the Daily Mail, which I think is amazing, So,
I think a big part of that is the landscape of newsrooms, not only, in the UK, but also here in the US and through perhaps even throughout the English speaking and maybe even throughout the non-English speaking world. I can't say. I do know for a fact what my studies and research have shown here in the US. The great majority of newsrooms in the US are populated by young women who are in their late 20s and early 30s. I spent almost 2 years researching the newsrooms of the United States, everything from small little community weekly papers to large daily newspapers to monthly publications, university publications where they had journalism programs. And what I found was that about 70% of those newsrooms were populated by young female writers in their late 20s to early 30s. And so if you want to get into the pages of those publications, you need to appeal to those journalists. You need to appeal to the writers who are doing the work. And this obviously speaks to that demographic. Her work obviously speaks to that demographic and beyond. But one thing I've been trying to argue to a lot of those who are proponents of the Shakespeare authorship mystery is that if you want to see print, you have to appeal to those writers who are working in those newsrooms. Then they have to want to write it and be able to appeal to their editors and get it passed and get it through. And then, that's the next level. Unfortunately, if you look at the editors, a lot of the editors are a bunch of stuffy old white guys with white hair and the old establishment that these young women are trying to push stories through or pitch stories to. But it's not surprising to me at all for you to say that the Daily Mail ran a great big story on it, because I would be willing to bet that the byline of that writer is a young female journalist, and she was able to successfully pitch it to an editor and get it through and get it in print.
I think the main reason why that story got through is because our media is mostly interested in celebrity, and Jodi Picoult counts as a celebrity. She's there's not that many best-selling authors around, and she's one of them. And they will follow anything that a best-selling author does that's contentious, and it's contentious. It has the extra excitement because, again, it's basically come out of Elizabeth Winkler's Atlantic article from whenever that was, 2019. Shakespeare Was a Woman. That's what's got Jodi Picoult interested. That's why she wrote the book out of that theory. And obviously that has a certain kind of timeliness. And it would make sense that particularly appeals to young women in newsrooms. But they wouldn't get the green light to publicise that if it wasn't someone of the standing of Jodi Picoult. They're not interested in following up. An academic has said this, an unknown academic has said that, unless, they like the ones where it's an unknown, not the Daily Mail, but the Guardian and, the more sort of broadsheet things, the Times, Telegraph and Guardian, they will look at, they've definitely been publicising recently. Unknown academic has discovered that this play, or says that this play is co-authored using a computer algorithm. They love those stories and they keep running them. There's been some new ones recently. They'll do that because they're interested in Shakespeare and they don't see the threat of co-authorship. They don't see that as, it's not the same as Shakespeare authorship doubt. They won't take doubt from anyone who isn't high profile. And I have to say, even really high profile people like Sir Mark Rylance and Derek Jacobi, they get a lot of flack in the press for their views. But Jodi Picoult is getting flack, but it will turn with more, she's more mainstream than they are. I still say to people, I say, and Mark Rylance, and they go, who's he? And I go, well, I guess if you're not into theatre or certain
right.
kinds of movies, I guess you don't know.
Sacrilege! But, how do you not know who Mark Rylance is?
I know, but I honestly, I meet it quite often. And he's exceedingly well known in my circles. But, and actually I had a reason to boil down a biography of Mark Rylance recently, and I went to the Wikipedia page to get some basic info, and it said that Time magazine had him as one of the 100 most influential people in the world a few years ago. So people should have heard of him, but I bet there's loads of other names on that most influential people list that people haven't heard of. They are into kind of, the sexy young actors, the really huge name authors. Jodi's, she's not the hugest, but she's definitely got some clout, so that makes a difference. Keanu Reeves coming out as a doubter a few years ago was quite good, but he hasn't really spoken about it.
No,
much,
he hasn't. And in fact, I recently attended. We have a music festival here in Southern Oregon, and his band was a headliner for one of the nights of the performances, and my wife and I attended. And I tried my best to try to get a message to him backstage, and I was actually able to leave an envelope with some information and a greeting and an invitation to come be a guest on the podcast at the tour bus. So hopefully he got it on his way out of there to the next gig. But obviously I haven't heard anything. But he's a very private guy about a lot of things. And so it doesn't surprise me that he'd be very private about this type of thing, even more so. But man, if he would just come out and do the podcast or do an interview with someone else even and like really throw some of that star power behind it, I think that could really make a big change. I think he has such a following.
It could.
And you'd have a lot of his followers who would suddenly just at least want to look into it, and maybe do some exploration.
Yeah, not dismiss it entirely, because he's known to be a really good guy, actually. I mean, I quite often bump into posts just about what a great guy he is. He still travels on public transport and he, helps out people in need. And so there's a lot of respect behind him. And I think people will then give him leeway, even if they think, well, I've always thought that was a batty idea, but if Keanu Reeves... or maybe not. Maybe they just go, well, actors, what can you say? Because I know that Mark Rylance gets quite a bit of that. But, the more people get behind it, they don't have to be high profile people, but the more people get behind it, the more weight there is on the walls of this great bastion of truth, which is not actually truth, it's all myth. and I don't know how long it can withstand the weight that is coming towards it, because that's a lot. I mean, I think the wave of stuff that Jodie Picoult is bringing towards it is a lot. And as the old guard die out and more young people who are prepared to entertain it, they become more the majority of the population as they get older. Give it 20 years. Maybe it'll be sooner. Who knows? When the Berlin Wall came down, we were all a bit surprised. You pressure, and then it kind of cracks, and suddenly you're on the other side of it. So we'll see.
It is true, isn't it? That it's sort of like a dam that can hold back the water for so long and so long and so long, and you never know when that one drop, that one little extra drop of water is too much. And finally, the floodgates open. Yeah. And so, I know there are a lot of folks who have been waiting for that for quite some time. And many of us have been doing everything we can to even just add one more drop every day, if we can, to that load to see how much more pressure it can stand before it finally cracks. And I think that right now there are a lot of sources of water. Yeah. And so I'm hoping that it'll be sooner than later.
Well, I think the cracks are appearing. And I think... actually, the move towards co-authorship in the Orthodox side of things is part of that. You might have a much more gentle transition than you think, I had a conversation recently with Emma Smith, Professor Emma Smith, who's become, she's very much the spokesperson on all the folio events last year. And she's become the person... the sort of public-facing person now that Stanley Wells is, sort of retired, not doing so much publicly. And she came over to me, actually, which was really interesting. She came over to me. She knows who I am. She knows what I do. And she had the most friendly and polite conversation with me. And she said, I don't know if we're that far apart. So, I'm really interested to see how that develops, because it feels to me that the Shakespeare skeptic side is embracing more and more people as talking about group theory. And I think it was a number of people, and they might have still the main person is this, but they're beginning to accept many hands. And the Orthodox camp is definitely accepting many hands. That has become now the standard line, whereas 10, 15 years ago, it really wasn't. I think the New Oxford Shakespeare, which came out 8 years ago, really changed things. That set the new tone. So now co-authorship is accepted. I initially thought it was something like that. It feels like it was a reaction against... I think it might well be, like a reaction against pressure from the authorship questioning side, because they often call it collaboration. And I think if you want to bill it as collaboration, that suggests people sitting in the same room working together, right? And that doesn't support a hidden author. But I don't think you can ever say this is collaborative unless you were there. Have you got photos? Have you got documentary evidence? You can have co-authorship without the people ever meeting. Co-authorship can happen in a number of ways and over a period of time. You could have someone adding scenes in long after a play has been written. We know that with Marlowe's plays, Rowley and Bird were given paid by Henslowe to go and write some new scenes to freshen the play up. So co-authorship can happen in a number of ways. So, I would always just try and pick people up when they say collaboration and say co-authorship. That's as far as we can say. And even then, because I've looked into the methods, the computational stylistics, because the other background that you didn't mention, because it wasn't really relevant to the Coursera course, but I had a background as a programmer. I used to earn my living as a freelance computer programmer. And so I resisted for a long time the pressure to get back into this. But as soon as these stylometric studies started coming out, I felt, okay, I do have to go back into my computing background.
They dragged me back in.
And, the methods... Well, I really felt like that because I was presenting some papers towards the end of my PhD. I presented a couple of papers publicly. And, people would come up to me. They'd either ask in the questions or they'd come up to me afterwards and say, so, you've got this background. Are you not going to go and drill into what do you say about these methods? And I'm going, I don't really want to do that. I've moved away from computing. I'm in English literature and English literary history now. I do actually think I'm more of a historian than I realised recently when I was at a conference. I'm more of a historian, a literary historian, than a English literature person. But yeah, so their methods leave something to be desired, and the claims that they make are not solid.
Well, you touched on two very important areas. I think you've touched on two very important areas that is at least very important to me, and one is the co-authoring aspect of it, because I think I have always felt that William Shakespeare, the pseudonym, was invented not just to be a pseudonym, but to be a brand. And I think that it became a brand.
It is a brand,
and I think that lends itself to there having been multiple writers involved in several of the works, if not most of them. And when you look at how modern brands are created, there are groups of writers that either collaborate or co-author some of our greatest films, some of our greatest television series. There's a cabal of writers, as it were. And I think that's an important aspect to the nature of trying to push forward on the skepticism and on the question of the mythology of the Stratford man. But I also agree that we have to be historians. I think history matters, and I think this history matters, and I think history has gotten it wrong. And I think if you look at the history of it all, the Elizabethan court, the players that are involved, the people surrounding those circles, the aristocracy of the time, how so many of the people who've been theorized to have been co-authors or collaborators in this story all are either related to each other or connected to each other by marriage or travel in the same circles. I mean, I think there's something to be said about that. And I think that if we can unlock that key, I think we'll learn so much more about the history of the time that will blow our minds and open us up to learning from that history in ways we haven't been able to do so far.
That's one of the things I really love about the authorship question, especially in terms of research side, because it's kind of, I know a lot has been done by authorship doubters, but in academia there's just almost nothing. We do have now, I started collating with other people in academia last year, a sort of, not exactly database, more of a spreadsheet of what doubters have published that are related to authorship doubt in various peer-reviewed journals. And we've got about sort of 50 or so papers in peer-reviewed journals between us. but it's like a massive open field waiting to be, no, there's way too much, even on one strand of it, for a single person to do in a full life. There's 100 years of research to do, I think, between a big, cohort of scholars once academia allows it in as a valid question. So that, is something that's very important to me, and something that I want to promote and would like to see happen in my lifetime, that it becomes something that you are allowed to research, and you could get the funds to do a sort of some research project to send people into with the appropriate skills in Latin and Italian, to go into the Italian archives, for example, and dig up, various things that are there. And there's so many places that you might send people. If you had the funding, if you could get the funding from in the UK, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, whatever the official funding bodies are, but you're a bit hamstrung until it's accepted in academia to make any sort of very major progress, I feel. And also, when you do make progress, it isn't necessarily taken seriously because it's not in a peer-reviewed journal, and so the media will just ignore it. They'll go, there's crackpots doing their crackpottery. So that's why, for me, the academic side is important, but it's such an exciting thing to research because there's so much still to learn. On the other side, on the brand, the Coursera material I actually took out of an unpublished book that I wanted to get published with a mainstream publisher, and it was basically about Shakespeare the brand. It was about that theory and exploring that theory. So I took the structure, because I'd pre-written, obviously I'd written the book, but I didn't want to self-publish it. So much in the Shakespeare authorship question is self-published. It doesn't go anywhere, really. I mean, Shakespeare the Evidence is self-published. It's on the LeanPub platform. It sold a few hundred copies, and that's kind of normal. It's probably even
and
good.
That's a very fair observation to make, without it being critical of anyone who has self-published their work or self-published their research. And we've had many guests here on the program who have self-published because it was their labor of love. It was their pet project. It was something they'd worked for a long time on, sometimes decades, to put it all together. And they wanted it in print, and they wanted it out there on Amazon, and they wanted to.
And it's really important that it's out there,
Indeed, but you're right. They really don't tend to go more. They don't tend to go anywhere more than a couple hundred copies here or there, and that's a shame. But it's a very true observation.
Yeah. So, having written Shakespeare the Evidence and self-published that, I wanted to try and have a go at a mainstream book. I tried really hard to get past the gatekeepers. I had friends in publishing. I tried to kind of get it through. My agent wouldn't represent it. I tried finding another agent who would, and then he just sat on it. And I thought, oh, okay, fine. But then I utilized it in the course. But the brand idea is powerful and important, and I think extremely relevant. And one of the things that makes me see the folio as the first folio, I mean, think about the first folio. Half those plays, we don't have any other copy of them. They certainly were around. You hear about them being around. Some of them, not all of them. Some of them just appear in the folio. But it brings this body of work together. Now, a third of those plays, even the Orthodox scholars are saying are co-authored, right? But there was this movement at the beginning of the 20th century, the disintegrationists, who were beginning to get into co-authorship and saying these things are co-authored using very traditional methods. And then Peter Alexander and other people stepped in 1920, I think, and there was a major talk given by, I think, E.K. Chambers in 1922. This is just when, of course, the Oxford theory is suddenly bursting powerfully onto the scene with Looney's book. But and they said, no, if it's in the folio, it's got the Shakespeare name on it, it's by Shakespeare. So the whole thing got shut down. And then 100 years later, here we are again, where again, the mainstream are beginning to sort of say co-authorship. And they're saying, if it has Shakespeare's name on the cover, as it does in the first folio, it isn't necessarily all by Shakespeare. That's a big concession, but they've made that concession in the last 10 years. They're now saying, okay, it isn't all by Shakespeare. Now, one thing we can say about the folio is it set the pattern. I mean, it was modelled on Johnson's folio of works, but it set the pattern for the next, the Francis and Beaumont folio, which is also associated, of course, with the King's Men, same company. And scholars have been saying for years that they did an analysis of Francis and Beaumont folio, and very few of those plays are by both Francis and Beaumont, and there's lots of other hands involved. So Francis and Beaumont was the follow-on brand from Shakespeare. You know,
that makes a lot of sense. We also
know from Henslow's diary. Yeah,
and
they went, oh, we've done the Shakespeare brand, and now we need a new one.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to say that the first time we met was in Ashland, Oregon, at an SOF conference there, and you delivered a paper about the quartos and about the evolution of the plays through the quarto process before they arrived in the folio, those ones that we do have quarto copies of. Am I making that up, or was that a presentation you made about them being sort of like first drafts?
The one I made in the one I made in Ashland was about the value of uncertainty. And it was much more on a sort of literary historical thing about the, I included things, I was working quite a lot on geographical references at the time. So I was looking at the all the claims from the Stratford side about, this is a village near Stratford-upon-Avon, and this is also another village in Warwickshire. So it was about uncertainty and embracing uncertainty. I think that was someone else's paper that you were talking about there.
Well, what I was driving what we do know, is that I believe that we have evidence of rough drafts of these plays that were then, and to speak to the co-authorship position, why couldn't it be that somebody got their hand on this first draft copy and said, oh, I'm going to change this scene or add this character or rewrite this, and then we're going to present it. And then 10 years later, somebody else gets it and says, you know what, it's not relevant to audiences now today, so we're going to change this and change that and rewrite this and give these lines to this actor instead. And I think that there is evidence for that when you look at the progression and the evolutionary process of some of these works that we see under earlier titles or similar titles. And the reason why I believe that to be accurate is because that's how it works today. That's how every writer works today. They write a draft. They give it to somebody to look at, to proofread it. Maybe they give it to an editor who cleans it up. They give it to someone else to look at. I mean, that's how all major Broadway musicals and West End musicals are written today. They do preview performances, and then they rewrite the scene, or they take a song out because it didn't sell well with the audience. I mean, that's just the creative process, isn't it?
It's just the creative process in theatre and film. Yeah, it's not in book writing. Speaking of someone who writes books, in writing novels, it does tend to be just you. There might be some editor might have something to say, but generally you're the one doing the dog's work, the donkey work, sorry. But so in theatre, it's a very collaborative process. I think it has been for a long time. So what I was trying to say this thing about Henslow's diary, that in Henslow's diary, it's the other company, but what you can see is theatre practice in work. And sometimes you see that he has paid 5 people to work on a play, and it has their names down. And when the play is eventually published, it's published under one name or 2 maximum. And that's very, very interesting. So it's just like the film business, where what you see on the film credit is not necessarily the people who originated the work or who did most of the work on the script. And, you can easily see how the name Shakespeare as a brand ends up on a play. My favorite sort of theory about the Stratford man's involvement in this is that he is a broker. I like the broker theory very much, because his whole profile, he's obviously involved. You can't say he's not involved unless you completely think that the will is a forgery. there's a clear link between him and his fellows in the company. And he's involved on a business level. That's what I would say. The evidence that he's involved in a business level is strong. The evidence that he's involved as a writer is weak, and as an actor is somewhat weak. But as a businessman, that's what his whole profile is. So there are more than 70 documents relating to him that we have. They're all of a business nature. And if you came at those as a very neutral historian, and there was no name attached to them, it just said John Smith, what did John Smith do for a living? You'd say, well, he's a businessman. He clearly does deals. He buys and sells grain. He buys and sells ties. He acts as a middleman in a marriage. When he's prosecuted for hoarding grain, he's not a farmer. He doesn't have lands at that time, as far as we know. So what's he doing? Well, he's being a middleman. He has presumably bought the grain and is holding it and will sell it at a higher price. He's actually being, listed as someone who's hoarding grain in a time of famine.
He's a price gouger.
Famine is when the grain price goes up.
He's a price gouger.
Well, that is what you call it nowadays, Yeah. But the only time you see him appear in court, he does take, the actual witness statement, and when he's got one of his signatures is from appearing in court. He was a marriage broker. Now, how many times did he broker deals between people like marriages? Because, that's a business, because it's brokering a business deal because there's a dowry involved. He ends up in court because it went wrong, because the dowry wasn't paid as agreed, and he's there as a witness to that. And he, does his obfuscating thing of saying he can't really remember. Such a middleman, he's got such a great middleman profile. And then you have things like George Buck coming to him, apparently asking who wrote Georgia Green. He writes down, that he's asked two people. He asked W. Shakespeare. He asks him who wrote Georgia Green, and he gives him some kind of nonsense answer. And then he goes to Richard Dewby. He goes to Dewby and he asks him and gets the correct answer. He gets the answer that it was Robert Greene, which is what scholars now say. Now, Dewby acted as a play broker for the opposite company. So it makes sense that you go to the person who is involved in buying and selling the plays. And since businessman is his profile, that would make complete sense that if he gets involved in that company where he gets a share of the profits, that his natural skills from the rest of his profile in Stratford, is that he's a middleman. So yes, he would buy in the plays and he'd buy them as cheaply as possible, giving the writers as little as possible. And then when he, sells them on, so he sells them on at a publisher. Let's say that there were several people involved, and then what the practice is, according to Lucas Earn, is that when a play stops being, very profitable, maybe 6 months after it's first had its run, they decide we'll sell it for publication. We'll sell it to a publisher. Now, until 1593, according to Lucas Earn, and I've never seen anything that conflicts with that. Public stage plays, not private closet plays or whatever as they're called, but public stage plays weren't usually published with the author's name on them until 1593, where George Peele's play is published and the name is on the dedication page, not the title page. What was on the title page was usually the name of the company, the players' company that it was associated with. So, as played by the Lord Chamberlain's men, blah, blah, blah. That's the billing. That's what people are interested in. No one cares about writers then and now. They don't care. Who wrote that? We don't care. Unless the writer becomes a huge name, no one cares. No one will tell you who wrote their favourite film unless they're a writer and they're really interested in the script. They'll usually tell you who starred in the film, And people were the same in theatre land in Elizabethan times. They're interested in, is Richard Burbage playing? Because that's what we're seeing. We're going to go and see the company. So plays were not published with a writer's name on for a long time, and they were mostly anonymous. And right until the end of the 16th century, still about half of them by the end of the 16th century are published anonymously. It's just normal practice. There's nothing sort of dodgy going on. It's just that he didn't bother putting the writer's name. just put the company's name on it. But they start towards the end of the 16th century. Again, this comes from Lucas Erne, which is, I'm trying to think the name of the book, which is a great book. But it's really all about the publishing business of plays at that point. And they start putting them out as literature. And for it to be accepted as literature, it really needs to go out under one name, It's like that thing, if it's written by 5 people, how can you say it's literature? The cult of the author, of the single author, is just beginning to grow with, bestsellers like Robert Greene and, scurrilous people like Thomas Nash. The sort of sense of the single author is interesting to people. So they start selling plays as literature, and they just need one name. And you can very much imagine that Shakespeare, who's the person who buys and sells, takes it to the printer and says, or the publisher says, I'd like to sell you this play. And you go, great, well, we're doing this new thing now. We're putting the author's name on the plays because we're selling it as literature. It seems to be going quite well. So what's the author's name to put on this play? And is he going to even remember? He bought this 6 months ago. He's bought a lot of plays since. These, writers come and go. Is he even going to remember? He might just going to go, well, just put my name on it. That'll do. You just need a name. Take my name. It's kind of mine now. I bought it for the company. Once you've sold the play, and those days when you're a writer, you sell a play to the company. The company own the play now. You don't have anything more to do with it. And if they want it rewritten by other people, they'll get other people to come in and add scenes and take stuff out. The actors will play with it. You don't have any kind of jurisdiction over it anymore once you've sold it to a company.
That's a very interesting date because 1593, of course, is the year that we first see the name William Shakespeare in print on Venus and Adonis. And so that coincidence is giant to me, that suddenly in that year, people started this new practice the very year that this brand new brand hits the scene with a giant best-selling, very evocative piece of epic poetry.
Yeah, but the name Shakespeare on plays doesn't appear till 1598, of course.
Right.
So you have a 5-year hiatus. There are plays out there that are part of the Shakespeare canon, but they're being published anonymously right up until 1598, when Francis Mears is the one who, in that same year, names these whole load of plays as being by Shakespeare. And then suddenly, in that year, you get plays that have previously been published anonymously, Richard II and Richard III, coming out with Shakespeare's name on them. And after that, some Shakespeare plays are published under the name Shakespeare and some are not. Romeo and Juliet stays anonymous for the entire time, I believe.
Now, is this the type of stuff that's covered in your course? Are these topics that you touch on in the course?
Yeah, I can't, it's really funny. I haven't done my own course and it's so long since I put it out there.
How many years has it been out there now? 6 years? Has it been out for 6 years?
6 years, 6 years. So I imagine that I touched on these things because these are things that I'm really interested in and I think they're important. I think they're important parts of the overall kind of mystery, as you say, of what's gone on here. These are all things that are really good to bear in mind. They're kind of contextually important things to know about, I think. So,
and in that time,
yes,
so
they're probably in the course.
For my audiences to realize this and to take a look at this in that time period, that's an average of close to 2,700 people per year registering for that course. At more than 16,000 registered students over a 6-year period. So that's a pretty awesome average. And it's no wonder that you have raised the tail feathers of so many of the Oxfords and Stratfordian bullies out there. And I'd like to shift gears to that because I know that many of my listeners are aware that you've been going through a struggle over the last several months. You've been a very outspoken and vocal advocate for the Shakespeare authorship mystery for quite some time, including against noted Stratfordian bullies who are now using the laws of the UK to try to silence you with lawsuits. And I know that there is a very sensitive nature to that because it is, open litigation. And so there's certain things that you have to stay away from sharing. But I wish that you would share what you believe you can without getting yourself into anything deeper legally with my listeners so that they can understand what's going and how what's happening and how they might be able to help.
Well, I fear you may have got me into trouble by using one of the words you just used.
Well, they can sue me. They can sue me if they want to. They can sue me for using the word bully.
It did not come out of my mouth. I just want to make that clear.
Right.
I want to make that very clear that I have made no such accusation. And I mean, essentially, I wrote 3 pieces on my authorship question Substack. I have a pretty small Substack called Adventures in the Authorship Question, which I had only very sporadically posted on because of being busy. I have picked it up more and I'm publishing more regularly now. But I reacted to something that was happening around Elizabeth Winkler's trip to London in, was that April or May? April, I think. And I kind of broke what was for me a kind of important rule. And have I been smacked on the wrist for it. I mean, it's important. Lessons learned. I mean, I would say 2 things. One is I do believe in following the golden rule, do as you would be done by. So I have tried very, very hard up to this point, up to earlier this year, not to get personal with people. I think it's wrong to personally attack people who don't agree with you. And however, that's basically what I did. I think it would be fair to say that I guess years and years of being the target of people's scorn kind of got the better of my better nature. And I just gave in to, a sort of attacking back, not thinking, because I don't live in a very litigious country. I have to say the UK is not very litigious, whereas it is in the US. But I don't know, I was just very naive. I know nothing about defamation law. That's blindingly obvious now. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about defamation law in the UK and its limits and defences. And essentially, so I was being, well, I'm not even sure how to use that. I've got to be so careful about the words I use, but I received a letter from a lawyer about defaming somebody on my Substack. I deleted all 3 pieces straight away, but that was not enough. I had to appoint a defamation lawyer specialist. They are extremely expensive. I know lawyers are expensive, but my goodness. I had several quotes and I couldn't, it was all a bit beyond my pocket, as I'd also just lost my job. It was several things coming at once. My father-in-law's death, I lost my job. I mean, literally all happened very close together. I came back from holiday. Right at the end of the holiday, I just checked my work email to find out if I was losing my job and found the lawyer's letter instead. And then the day after the holiday, I lost my job. And then a few days after that, it was my father-in-law's funeral. And it's just been a bit of a challenging year, I would say.
Is the job loss connected to this in any way, or that's completely separate? You didn't lose your job because of this issue, did you?
No, God, no. No, they sacked half of they sacked all of the professors, because we have a different system. Professors are the most senior, and then senior lecturers, that's where I'm at, they sacked nearly all of the professors apart from the head of department. They sacked about half the senior lecturers. They basically sacked all the senior staff that they could, and kept the junior less paid, lower paid.
So it was it was a massive lecturers. Layoff situation.
It's part of it was a massive layoff situation.
Okay. Yeah, so not connected to this or not a punishment or anything to you for your positions just unfortunate, or anything. Okay.
Unfortunate timing all round, really. Sure. Just a lot of challenging stuff for me to grow through. I'll put it like that. But so I had, because suddenly it was like, okay, and I've also got no salary, and now I've got lawyers' bills. So I set up a crowdfunder on GoFundMe, and people have been completely amazing. I mean, I can't tell you, I can actually feel myself feeling a bit emotional just thinking about it. But it's actually been one of the really great things to come out of this, because, being spanked for breaking your own rules is not, it's not great. I haven't enjoyed it. I realised that I made a mistake, and I'm apologising for it publicly. And it's been very costly in time, energy, lack of sleep, and money. But the money side of things, a lot of it has been helped enormously by generous donors to the GoFundMe. I think I'd be completely in bits without that.
I understand. I can't understand, because I haven't ever been sued for defamation. Though I worked as a journalist for many years, I've been threatened many times with libel suits. And here in the United States, defamation and libel are separate. Libel means in print. Defamation is usually vocal or oral. So I've been threatened many times, but no one's ever actually gone through with it, because they haven't actually had a case against me, because I've always been very careful about what I've written and where I've placed my positions. But I do know that there's been a lot of talk here in the US lately about how the UK is shifting when it comes to things like censorship and like defamation. And I know there have been some issues and some incidents where social media users have now come under fire for quote unquote misinformation or disinformation. And there's an entire freedom of speech issue, I think, that's being raised around the world right now when it comes to those types of things. I don't know, obviously, the defamation laws of the UK, and I don't know exactly what it was that you wrote about the individual.
Well, but I can't link this to freedom of speech, because I did wrong. I basically said something that wasn't true. I did do it. I mean, two things. One is my initial two pieces that got me into trouble were, I suppose, they were satire. They were humour pieces. There was quite a funny line from the other side's lawyer at one point, when my lawyer had written saying, they were humour pieces, which they were. They were genuinely meant to be funny. It's not funny when you're being attacked, though, and I should know that. It's like when you're actually being targeted by not that I'm a comedian, but if you are attacked by a comedian, they're making jokes at your expense. That's not funny. For you, that's neither here nor there. I hurt somebody. I hurt another human being. And no matter what I think about, the way that they've been to me and people that I know, in, the things that they've written about me publicly and people that I know, nevertheless, it's like, two wrongs don't make a right. You can't say that's wrong behavior and then do it yourself. So it was not only a mistake, it was kind of a moral error on my part, and I should not have got carried away with how funny I thought I was, basically. And I think it was just the letting off steam, as I say, after many years of being scorned and never snapping back at them. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I got sort of, it was really on someone else's behalf as well. It was really because of what Elizabeth Winkler's been going through for the last year or so since her book came out, and I just felt kind of cross about that, because I've seen how it's affected her, and it's not fun. She's had it far worse than I ever had it.
She has it, and I happen really to, Elizabeth and I have talked about it a couple of times, and we've talked about the individual in question that's involved in all of this, and things that have been written and said, and attacks that have been made. And one of the things I would say, I know here in this country, when you're a public figure, the rules change. And so if you're a celebrity, or you're a journalist, or you're a television personality, or even if you're an author, or anyone who's in the public eye, tends to be fair game for certain types of attacks, unless they are you're accusing them of some sort of a crime they didn't commit. You're accusing them of having some sort of a medical ailment that isn't true. or you're accusing them of doing something or having committed something that then they can prove has taken away from their ability to earn their living. Those tend to be the strict rules here in our country. I don't know what it's like in the UK.
Well, there are. I mean, the thing is that my lawyer did think that the case of sort of serious harm to one's reputation and career is actually quite hard to prove.
Yeah.
But I was not prepared to spend £200,000 that I don't have to go to court to prove it. I would honestly just rather apologise for what I said. Because, I admit that what I said was factually inaccurate on one hand and actually unkind on the other hand. Factually inaccurate, I was given some information by somebody that I trusted and I repeated it without fact checking. So never do that, guys. Just always fact check. The reason why I didn't.
Lessons from Dr. Barber.
Because I was going, as a humour piece, it's just fun. Yeah, learn my lessons so you don't have to go through your own defamation case. But I didn't fact check partly because I was just stupidly busy. It was May. I had a massive pile of undergraduate marking and I wouldn't have been putting anything out under those circumstances. Normally, I wouldn't even be writing a piece. But I just, I've had a lot of flack from certain quarters over the first sort of comedy piece that apparently the first humour piece that I put out would not have fallen foul of any defamation laws, although it was unkind. But then what happened was because of the reaction I was getting to that, someone sent me some information that I then included in a revised version. And that was what got me into trouble. There we go. So, I fell into an elephant trap that I am the elephant. And yeah. Mea culpa.
And there's a certain level, when you have certain people who are of a certain prominence and who also perhaps have greater financial means, then they can engage in what we call over here lawfare. And they can use the legal system to come after you. And they know going into it that they're going to outspend you. They know that it's going to break you financially and that you're going to give in and concede. That's why we call it lawfare, right? And so I'm not certain that's exactly what has happened here, but it sure does sound to me like it's that type of a retaliatory effort on the part of the person who quote unquote has been wronged here. And as you say, because I know some of the details of what this person has done to others, it's someone who does this regularly. And you're just one of many targets that this person has had on their list for years of this. And Elizabeth is definitely another one who has suffered, as you mentioned, most recently, probably to the highest degree. But there are other members out there, other people who are part of the Shakespeare authorship question, who have been guests of this program, who have also mentioned the same individual. And, he's been talked about on this program multiple times, and he's never come after me. I dare him to. I dare him to come after me. I have no problems.
Oh, don't do that.
I dare him to go back and listen to every single one of my 145 episodes and try to find something he thinks that he could use against me. Because I don't, I believe that it's a dangerous world when ideology can become such a source of visceral and vitriolic ad hominem attacks on others. And, pot calling kettle black is a real thing.
It's so interesting how, I would say that this individual is really, genuinely, articles that have been written along the lines of I better be very careful what I say because I could identify the person, but articles along really strongly associating authorship doubt with like right-wing conspiracy theories and stuff, like right-wing conspiracy theories. I mean, I was a member of the Labour Party in the UK for a while. I've always been a bit of a lefty, but sure, I don't know, but absolutely convinced that this is something genuinely. Oh, sorry, that's a little alarm going on, and I can't find the source. Hold on. Sorry, it genuinely. I don't know, that it's genuinely threatening to civil society. I mean, literally has written something along those lines, and that's not, that's a fervent belief of this person. That's it's very interesting always has been very interesting to me to understand why this makes people so very angry. But it really does.
I think mean-spirited people are.
I can completely understand.
Mean-spirited people are mean-spirited deep inside, and it doesn't matter what the issue is or what the topic is. I mean, I've met plenty of mean-spirited people in my life in all kinds of different fields. Well, it has nothing to do with the Shakespeare authorship mystery in many cases. I just recently had an encounter with somebody who's a very unhappy person and mean-spirited inside and spends a lot of time talking and gossiping about other people and trying to tear them down. I think those are certain personalities that exist in the world in a variety of realms. And when they end up with some sort of power, for instance, the power of the keyboard warriors who post on social media anonymously in order to wage their attacks, or if they have the power of the pen, or God forbid, they have the power of a publication behind them, that mean-spirited nature can come out in a variety of horrible ways. And I think it does sometimes in the world from certain people.
Yeah. But I don't want to condemn even people who clearly hate my guts as mean-spirited, because I think we are the sum of our experiences, and there are reasons why people are the way they are. There's reasons for the opinions they hold. There's reasons for their, this person has people who love them. This person has has friends and people who care about them. They just and in fact quite a big following as well of people who clearly admire them. They have a lot of followers on social media, and you can't just write people off. I don't know this individual. I've not met them. And even if I met them and they behaved in a mean-spirited way, it's a thing I learned from parenting. Like, don't say you're bad, say this thing you've done is bad. It's like, there are a lot of reasons for, I guess, developing a fairly antagonistic way of being in the world. And it's usually because you've been very badly hurt by the world. You perceive the world in a certain way as a result of probably some not very nice experiences. So,
well, I would say the nature of the conflict demonstrates the great difference between you and them. For instance, obviously, the nature of the legal complaint against you involves this person declaring that they have a giant financial interest in their position, and you do not. And that immediately would make me suspect to that person's position. Well, you have a conflict of interest on this position. You are earning money and generating money. It's the same thing I say about the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. They are a giant, huge financial money-making machine off of the mythology of the Stratford man. Of course, they're going to stand behind that position come hell or high water.
Yeah. Well, that's the reason why the SBT have fought it, although it's interesting because I see a change of tactics, and I actually know someone, a bit of an insider, about there has been a bit of a shift away from their previous strategy, shall I say, but I won't go into that too much. But I will say on this front that the person's money doesn't come from, as far as I know, maybe they are funded. What do I know? But I know they have sort of independent funds that came from a different background, so they do have the wealth to pursue me through the courts if they wish. And hopefully that's not happening now. hopefully. But that it actually genuinely what this was, if I look at what the complaints were about the pieces I wrote, it was hurt feelings, and it wasn't unreasonable given what I'd said. But in some cases, I would say some of the aspects, certainly the things that were untrue, that I hadn't fact checked, that weren't true, that was just stupid of me, and I shouldn't have put in things I hadn't checked. But the other stuff looked to me like they were reading into it stuff that I had not intended at all, that was definitely not what I meant. But they were interpreting it in a very hurtful way. And that, to me, is the behaviour of someone that's been very badly hurt and is looking for hurt everywhere. Well, like how when we've had a bad experience with a particular kind of, thing we start, I don't know, just with life. Earlier in my life, I was quite an angry person and quite depressed. I mean, those two things go together. I was a very angry, depressed person. And I sort of vibrated that out into the world, and I kind of got it back a bit as well. And I read insult and bad, things that were, I read people's behaviour and their words in the worst possible way because I was so hurt. Whereas actually, they probably weren't meant that. Sometimes they were. Sometimes it was very much like, bugger off, Roz.
Sometimes that person was just an asshole. Really meant it.
No, they weren't. I mean, there was this lovely, this is a little personal story for you, Stephen, but there was this, I was completely alone in the world because I managed to alienate everybody I knew. I had like one friend, but even she was kind of avoiding me and waiting for me to get over myself. But I'd made a new friend who I just absolutely loved, this woman called Nicola, who lived up the road. She was also a single mum. And, we went out clubbing together and we spent New Year's Eve together. And I thought, my God, she's my new best friend. But I talked her ear off one night about my own problems when it was her birthday, totally not thinking about the fact that it was her birthday. And I was just being a boring, depressive misery guts, focused on myself. And then she stopped kind of calling, and she kept, I'd ring her and leave a message and she wouldn't call back, and I thought, what's going on? And then I finally got hold of her and I said, I haven't seen you for ages, it'd be great to see you sometime, Nicola. And she said, I know where you live. And it was the most devastating thing. I thought, wow, okay, that's very clear. That's very clear message. Thanks very much. But, so the point was that was very much bugger off for us. But I think a lot of the time I was just reading the whole world was against me. And I think I recognize other people who have the same idea,
My mother used to tell me all the time,
talking about.
And I'm sure you've heard it, and I know a lot of the listeners out there have heard it, but my mother used to say all the time, misery loves company, and miserable people want other people to be miserable. And they tend to lash out at others. Yeah. They tend to try to bring others down, or they do make it all about themselves and their perceived hurts and wrongs.
Yeah, that's right.
That's something that only they can fix from the inside out. I find it very hard to believe based on, we don't know each other very well. We've only been in the same room together a few different times. But I find it very hard to believe that you were ever a person who had no friends and had alienated everybody out of your life, because you're so personable and you're so charismatic and energetic and knowledgeable. So I find that really difficult to believe, but I can understand that. And I know from
really
your
true.
history that you were, that you have suffered some trauma in your life, and you make that clear in your biography.
Yeah.
And you also turn that
That's
around
right. So I
in
was
your life and
recovering from
became
that,
a trauma counselor too, haven't you?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, really, because I had to recover from being right on the edge of not existing. That's really where I was at that stage. And I'd come out of an abusive marriage, and there was pretty not much of me left. I was just shreds of a person. I was very angry, very depressed, felt like I had wasted my life on, I certainly wasted my 20s and half of my 30s on somebody who really kind of set out to destroy me and had done quite a good job. And I kind of had to rebuild from scratch, and I wasn't an easy person to be around at that time. So I had to build myself back up. And once I'd got a certain way along with it, I qualified as, because I was recovering really from trauma, I qualified as a trauma counsellor, and I did that on the side while I was doing my PhD. It was a little source of extra money doing one-to-ones, and I did group work as well for people who couldn't afford the one-to-one rate. I ran a weekly group. And it was fantastic work, and it still means a great deal to me. And I'm now, because I'm writing, I've got 2 Substacks. One's an authorship question one, and one is basically chunks of memoir and other stuff. And I'm working towards talking openly about the effects of trauma on a life, really. And how to come out the other side, and how to come out and shine, and really come back to yourself and to fulfill potential that maybe got crushed by having traumatic experiences. So none of this would have been possible if I hadn't recovered from that time that I'm speaking of. It's all come out of that.
Wow, that's it. That's incredible, and thank you for sharing such personal details. That's really incredible. So how do we help? Tell us where we find what we need to find. If we want to help contribute to your legal defense fund, let's start there. What do we do? How do we do that?
Oh boy. Well, it's on GoFundMe. I haven't got like an easy URL to give you or anything like that. But if you go to GoFundMe and you search for my name, Ros Barber, it should pop up. It's still open because this is not yet concluded. And there are some costs that I have to meet. It's been legally expensive for both sides. And obviously I have been covering, with the GoFundMe, I've been covering my side's expenses, but I need to pay something towards his costs. That's part of the agreement. And, I have created, again, I accept, I created trouble in his life as far as he's concerned. And quite right. I published stuff about him that was really hurtful, and he felt in his, from his side, he needed to have the record corrected and apologise. And the issue was, he came into the comments and I immediately detected that sneering, disparaging tone, and I shut him down and booted him off the comments. Because I couldn't, I've had too much of that. It feels really poisonous to me, and I just don't like it around me. So I've just got used to block, don't respond, block. And block and ban. I'm not interested in people who are going to, talk to me in a very disrespectful way. I kind of had enough of that in my first marriage, really. I won't take that from people. So because I then, shut down his, if you like, his right to reply on my blog, because I go, it's my blog, it's my space, I don't want you in here. Then he felt he had no recourse but to go to lawyers. So I have to cover some of his expenses too. And actually he's been, to some extent, he's been generous in saying he's not chasing me for the whole lot, because he was going to chase me for the whole lot and damages, and we've come back from that position a bit. So it's not as bad as it could be. Hopefully, I'm saying this and none of this is yet concluded. Sure. And I hope I haven't said anything that makes anything worse on this podcast, because I'm basically going to have to be careful for the rest of my life now.
You have not. Trust me, if there's any blame, it can fall on me. And I'll use hypotheticals. Imagine that there was an ox fraudster who hates my podcast and went to my social media page and started posting all kinds of negative things against my podcast and against me, and I blocked that person, and they come after me with some sort of a civil suit. And what I learned is what really pissed them off was that they could no longer engage in the type of conflict they were seeking with me. And I would feel like, okay, so the problem isn't anything that I said to you. The problem isn't anything I said on my podcast or any of my guests. The problem is that you want a fight. You want to have this contentious, bitter exchange that I'm not willing to do. And because I took that away from you, that's why you're so upset with me. That's how I would feel if that happened to me on my podcast.
Yeah, but it's not an accurate parallel to what happened with me, because it was about what I had said. It was about what I wrote in the end, three pieces. It very much was about the words I used. In some cases, it was very much about their interpretation of my words, which was not what I had intended. But it's hard to prove intention, isn't it? But it's not worth fighting about, is all I would say. I don't think it's worth fighting about for either of us. I hope not. I will be making a public apology. The whole thing has been very stressful, painful, and costly, and I hope it's close to being at an end now.
Well, there you go, fellow Quillers. You can help. Anyway. You can help Ross. You can help Ross with her legal defense fund by going to gofundme.com. Search under her name. It's ROSBARBER. You can also find information about her books and her research and her lecturing that she does. She can also be booked as a guest lecturer on a variety of topics. You can find out all of that information at her website, which is rosbarber.com, ROSBARBER.com. That's rosbarber.com to find out everything that is going on with her and what she's working on and what she has going on. There's a way to subscribe to her email list there as well. And to find out more about her new Marlowe research project that she's working on as well, that we didn't even have time to talk about today. So we'll have to have you back and share some more of that information. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing everything, not only just your research and your work and the history of that and the positions that you hold, but also some of these very personal experiences that you have been through and that you've been so willing to be open with us about. We really appreciate having you as a member of the Quiller Nation.
Thanks so much. It's been fun. I'll see you another time.
Okay, Ross. Thank you so much. You heard it here, ladies and gentlemen. And if you want to know more, of course, obviously go to don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com. Send your emails, letters, and defamation lawsuit filings to contact at don'tquillthepodcast.com, contact at don'tquillthepodcast.com. We're here, we're ready, we're waiting. And until next time, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.